So the next speaker is Diane, who is a candidate for the U.S. Senate in the United States from New York, in New York. And, the New York senator is a very important post. It's a springboard for the presidency of the United States. So, while we wish Diane good success, we hope that she wins the race next year in 2024, and then from there, she wins the next race for the President of the United States. So, welcome with me, Diane Sayre.
Well, thank you. I'm really honored to be here with the speakers that we've heard today and that we will hear tomorrow. And I want to thank Helga Zepp-LaRouche for pulling together the peace movements of the world. And I want to thank Jacques Cheminade for his steadfast leadership here in France and internationally. Humanity is undergoing a transition, and it's a very dangerous one because you have some shriveled up, old, evil people who are used to running evil institutions who don't want to give up the power that they used to have. And I say used to because they have lost that power. But the danger to the world comes from the fact that they refuse to recognize it. In 1976, Lyndon LaRouche provided a pathway for what we are now seeing with his proposal for an international development bank in which every nation would have the opportunity to achieve its full independence in the way that our President Franklin Roosevelt envisioned should have happened at the end of World War II. But in 1976, when Mr. LaRouche put forward his program and also launched his first campaign for the presidency of the United States, the financial and intelligence community, tied very much to the interest of the British Empire, still had too much power, and they prevented him from becoming President of the United States. And as people here know, there were many assassinations of various people around the world to prevent that new order from coming into existence. Today, these institutions are totally bankrupt. I mean the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, NATO, the New York Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Bank of England, J.P. Morgan Chase, they're all bankrupt. So everything they now try to do not only backfires, but it actually has the opposite effect of what they intend. Take the case of Russia. President Biden announced it in Poland that it is the intent of the United States, the UK and NATO, to destroy Russia. That is not Russian propaganda, although a number of us, as was mentioned, have been accused of being information terrorists and Russian propagandists for saying it. That is what the president said. Is Russia destroyed? No. The Russian economy is stronger than ever, and Putin is now even more popular since the Prigozhin-Wagner attempted insurrection was so quickly and efficiently put down. Contrary to the idiot propaganda in the West, Putin is stronger and his nation is more unified. However, the arrogant and, I suspect, also drug-affected blindness of the so-called Western leaders prevents them from seeing this. The grave danger is that the delusional West thinks that they can blackmail and threaten 6 billion people to change course and to go back to being slaves. don't think I'm exaggerating or Helga is exaggerating when she talks about the danger of nuclear war. Let me remind you that President Biden has already crossed several of his own boundaries while escalating the proxy war in Ukraine. He said, no tanks. We are sending tanks. He said, no F-16s. We are sending F-16s. We are now sending cluster bombs, a war crime. He also said, Nord Stream will be ended. I promise you. And he delivered on that promise. Would he, Rishi Sunak, Stoltenberg, therefore approve of a strike on the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant? The reason why we are here, all of us, is because we intend to stop this. We hope to allow mankind to move into a new direction, but we face some obstacles. In the West, maybe it's the most frustrating that our governments don't seem to listen to us. Not only that, they persecute the truth tellers. Because our societies have been so culturally degraded, it is easy to respond with violence. Before Helen Keller had access to language, if she needed or wanted something, all she could do is throw a temper tantrum. She caused harm in hope of getting a response. The violence can be expressed outwardly, as in the riots and looting just seen here in France, and has happened in the USA in the last years, or the mass shootings in the United States. We now have a mass shooting every 11 or 12 hours. Or it is expressed violence inwardly, drug addiction, alcoholism, and suicide. In the United States, the rate of suicides among children aged 10 to 19 has tripled. So everyone seems to believe that brute force, rather than poetry, is the way to send a message. What is the message? That's our challenge, because God has created each of us with an innate sense of truth and justice. But due to the willful degradation of our culture, like the young Helen Keller, we feel powerless to express these principles and to be heard. The first thing we must remind ourselves is that the universe is created according to the principles which exist in our souls. And this is why, if we temper ourselves, if we tune ourselves to universal principles, we can defeat all evil. But this is hard work. Let me give an example about the wrong idea of justice. Maybe you don't have this problem in Europe, or maybe you do, but in the United States, we are obsessed with punishment. It's a popular sentiment that if someone does something harmful or illegal, they should be made to suffer the consequences, which is supposed to ensure, like a dog, that they don't repeat the action. We have a culture which blames people for being refugees. In the United States, we call them illegals. There is no concern for whatever monstrous acts, even committed by our own governments, which may have driven them to flee their country, but merely rage that they get a hotel room, they get medical care, and they might even get a cell phone. This self-righteous indignation is fueled by the anxiety and frustration felt by millions of Americans who themselves can't afford health care or rent or are hopelessly indebted. And for another time, I actually think that this policy of flooding areas with helpless refugees is designed to get people to start killing each other. but we'll talk about that later. I've been reading a book by Dr. Homer Venters, who was the chief medical officer for the New York City jails. And the book is called Life and Death in Rikers Island. To give you a sense of the result of this punishment attitude, I'll tell you the story of a 25-year-old inmate at Rikers who died there. His name is Jason Echeverria. On the evening before his death, Mr. Echeverria was being held in a unit for people with mental illness who failed to obey orders. But it was decided that he was fit enough to be subjected to solitary confinement as a means of punishment. According to Dr. Venters, quote, "In order to escape the stress of solitary confinement, Mr. Echeverria swallowed a packet of industrial soap and then told the correctional officers that he needed medical attention. Passing medical staff confirmed he was vomiting and required medical attention, but the Department of Corrections staff and their supervisor was that he had to be kept in the cell overnight. And not only that, they were taunting him and ignoring him as he vomited blood, bile, and lye and screamed in pain for help and then died." Now, suppose they had allowed the medical staff to treat him before he died. If they had saved his life and he just had suffered a little bit, would that be the right way to teach him a lesson? Then you might say, well, everybody doesn't think that way. It's not how things are done most of the time. But I'm telling you that that is the institutional policy. Take sanctions. What's the idea of sanctions? Just starve the people. Let them see their children die in their arms, and they'll shape up. They'll overthrow their leader, or their leader will finally start obeying us. That's the same attitude expressed by the correction officers in Rikers Island. Do you think a society which tolerates and promulgates that barbarism will be capable of stopping a nuclear war? So that's why we must temper ourselves. We must remember certain universal fundamental principles so that we can act in accordance, which is a great word because it has accordance with the universe, which will then aid us by amplifying our work. Now, I have a short video, which I hope you won't find too annoying, as an example of this. So let's talk a little bit about resonance, and I'm going to use a trombone as an example of how, if we are truthful, that the universe can amplify our truthfulness, and it's a matter of principle. Now, to make a sound on the trombone, we have this, which is not an amplifier. That's not very beautiful. It's kind of labored. That sound doesn't really carry. When I put my mouthpiece into the trombone, then we get a great sound which carries. But you have to be precise in your tuning because the trombone has a certain length, and if you adjust the length, the resonance changes, for example, or the pitch changes. There, you can hear that the longer the length, the lower it wants to sound. So what happens if I decide that I want to play, but instead of picking the right position in my trombone, I choose something arbitrary? I can get a note, but it's not beautiful and it won't carry. So I think you get the idea. We have to sound a certain trumpet or trombone, but not in an arbitrary way. It has to be based on truthful principles if we want the universe to amplify our voice. Similarly, if you have a mass movement for change and you ask for the wrong thing, that is, your demand is not in coherence, as Confucius might say, with the laws of heaven, you might regret getting what you asked for in a way that you did not intend. The fundamental principle of our universe and the relationship to it is growth. That is, and we're learning this more and more with the Webb telescope, that contrary to foolish opinion, the universe is moving from a lower order to a higher order, to higher energy density, greater complexity. Life on the planet used to be little single-celled organisms that regularly went extinct in large numbers until photosynthesis occurred. Suddenly, more advanced life was possible, and we came to fish and amphibians which would propel themselves, no longer dependent on the ebb and the flow of the tide. Then came mammals, which not only could regulate motion, but also body temperature, requiring a great increase in caloric intake per kilogram of body mass. Then humans emerged, and suddenly, not only could we regulate our own activity and temperature, but we could change the environment. We could cook our food. We could plan into the future, planting crops to consume later. We could build houses to enable survival in extreme temperatures. People are able to improve the environment to make it possible for more people to live more happily. People can even make it possible for more animals to live more happily, although some of them, like rats, we don't want to increase too much. This means that the natural creative love of discovery in the human mind is resonant with the universe. This means that if we wish to survive as a species, we must create the conditions for each individual person to develop their innate potential as much as possible. Do you think there is such a thing as too many geniuses? We need billions of geniuses. We are so arrogant to imagine that we have mastered all of the secrets of the universe, and now we should just stop eating and using electricity and reduce our carbon footprint. It is precisely trying to halt growth which will kill us all, because it goes contrary to the laws of the universe. So far, the most efficient means we've discovered to foster the development of the individual is the principle of the nation state. So the sovereignty of nations must be respected, and the need for each nation to have ever-increasing available energy and increasing energy density. We don't all need to have the same language or religion or appearance, but we do need to respect the principle that the measure of our success is the development of mankind. This is why the one standard which gives any government legitimacy is the principle of the general welfare. Any policy which seeks to degrade the humanity of the individual person or any group of people is wrong. The world is now at a crossroads, as the United States was when Abraham Lincoln was elected in 1860. the United States had reached a breaking point where it was unavoidably obvious that slavery was creating a harsh dissonance with the principles of our republic. The United States could not survive if that evil institution were allowed to continue. Similarly, the world has reached the point where humanity will no longer submit to a system which arbitrarily determines that one group is superior to another and has the power to make its own rules, as if natural law and the created universe did not exist. The majority of mankind is no longer willing to pretend that snow is black. So, if we wish to be heard and to have the power to change our own sorry governments, we will have to tune our trombone